Is there a best way to write a romance in 2025? I've written at least 70 or 75 of them. In fact, I just got my 50 book award from HarperCollins, who owns Harlequin. I've written a lot of romances over the course of my career, and I would say that right now is the best possible time to write a book. It's always the best possible time to write a book. Waiting and putting that dream off for another year or another year or another year is not going to get you any closer to your goal. So absolutely start writing that romance this year, but with a few things in mind, because the market is saturated. There are like 30 million books on Amazon. I think it's like 100,000 are loaded every single month. There's a ton of competition out there. In order to stand out and in order to be successful, you've got to keep a few key things in mind. Number one, you want the book to be relatable, which means you need to create flawed characters. You don't just want these perfect people that have perfect lives and perfect hair and go along and fall in love with the perfect person. That is no fun to read about. It's kind of like watching a couple of Instagram influencers fall in love. Not super believable. We all kind of know that nobody's hair looks like that every single day and nobody is that perfect. So when you make the book relatable and you give your characters real world problems, which is number two, you make people that the reader roots for and the reader connects with. We need people that are like us inside, because that's what we want to read about. You can write any kind of profession for your character. You can make them a billionaire, you can make them a police officer, you can make them a dog groomer. No matter what profession you pick for your character, that is just part of the character that makes us, reluctant to get close to other people, or scared to trust somebody else, or burned by love and reluctant to fall in love again.
Well, I think that's a super philosophy, Sean. I mean, that way you could actually go through the rest of your life without ever really knowing anybody.
What we really relate to is the stuff that they have going on in here. The insecurities, the doubts, the anxieties, the fears, all of the stuff that all of us deal with all of the time. I don't know if you guys have watched any of the dating reality shows on Netflix, but if you watch like The Later Daters or Love is Blind, you hear a lot of those insecurities and doubts that have come up for people because of their past and their histories. And the reason why those shows have been so successful is that the cast is relatable. They are people that are just like you and me, that are just looking for love and happiness. Another tip for writing a romance this year is to write about real world issues. You don't have to write about really dark real world issues like world hunger, but if you can bring in an element that the reader really cares about, that's going to make your book that much more unforgettable and compelling to the reader. Kennedy Ryan does a great job with this. I actually love her books. She's my favorite romance writer. Her book, Before I Let Go, deals with miscarriage and a marriage that has fallen apart. Those are real world issues. She deals with it in a really excellent way where she makes it believable yet not completely heartbreaking, because it is a tough subject to kind of dance around. Because no matter what the plot framework is for your book, even if it's like climbing Mount Everest or running from a bad guy somewhere in Afghanistan, which may not be so relatable to every reader, the real world issues at the core of it are relatable to the reader, and that's what makes them connect, because they will root for the woman who is climbing Mount Everest if she's there with her ex and the reader wants them to get back together. So it's about the internal real world emotions, issues, anxieties, fears. So building on these really emotional issues that all of us have faced or have dealt with in some way, shape, or form creates a book that feels like it could happen to you or to your neighbor or to anybody. And that's what makes readers really connect with the characters, because they feel like they're neighbors or friends. Number three, you don't want to put your characters in a bubble. I get that having cell phones and text messaging and social media makes your book a lot more complicated, because there's so much more information out there than there was when I was dating, when I was young. Or even if you were in a relationship 10 years ago, what we have now for information at our fingertips is so much more complex and adds a whole other layer to your characters in your book. But you have to add those elements, because otherwise the book goes back to not being believable, not being relatable. I read an article one time about the show Friends and how different it would have been if they had had cell phones. This was just before cell phones were really becoming a thing. And if those characters had had cell phones, it would have totally changed the tone of the show. But the fact is, cell phones do exist in the real world. So if you are writing a contemporary novel, you want to make sure that you don't have those characters just existing some kind of social media free, phone free zone. Because even if they're in the middle of the ocean, the chances are there's some satellite that can pick up a signal. So make your romance more believable by not keeping your characters in a bubble. And the final thing that you want to have is believable conflicts. I think this was the hardest thing for me to learn when I was writing all those books that got rejected. It was so hard for me to figure out how conflict worked. I have a bunch of videos on this, but essentially what conflict is those real world issues, those relatable factors that are in your character's life coming to a head as they're getting closer to somebody else. Because as any therapist will tell you, you can't be ready for love until you love yourself and you've dealt with your own issues. Otherwise, you're just going to repeat the same bad habits over and over again. We all have that friend who keeps dating Mr. Wrong, and your characters will do the same thing unless they have fixed their issues. Those conflicts stem from the deep emotional wounds that these characters have from their pasts. To figure out believable conflicts, you want to create a believable past for your character. In the description below, I have a link to my free character master plan, which helps you delve into your character's deep emotional wounds. These are the things that your character went through when they were younger that shapes and affects who they are today. It creates their reluctance to trust. It creates their fears of abandonment. It creates all of their issues. You don't have to be major traumas. You don't have to have your character lose a limb in a car accident or watch their mother fall off a cliff. It doesn't have to be anything that big. It can still be small things. Whatever we have gone through in the past creates who we are in the present. And so to create believable conflicts, believable characters, and relatable characters, you need to kind of know at least some of their history so you understand why they're acting the way that they are, what is at stake for them if they don't fix these things, and how, most of all, it impacts the romance. So a character who is reluctant to trust, that is going to affect the romance between them. Finally, and this may seem silly, but the best way to write a romance in 2025 is to read a bunch of romances. You want to read what is currently out there, and you want to read widely. Don't just read one author, read a lot of them. Get a really broad understanding of what is popular right now, what people are buying, what people are talking about. And then if you really want to do some more research, go deeper. Go look at the reviews for that book. What are people relating to? When I read the reviews for my books, which I don't do a whole lot because it can mess with my creative process, but what I see by and large from people is that they really related to the small town and the family setting. So when I started seeing that in my reviews, I realized that that was something I had a strength in, and I needed to use that even more in my books. So I created an entire series based on the small town and the family because people really related to that in what I wrote. So look at the books that are out there, read them and study them, and then use that information to figure out where you fit in the marketplace. What do you like to write about? What sets you apart as a romance author? Where are you going to kind of find your own little niche and corner of the world here? That's what you want to carve out and understand before you sit down to write your book. If you're going to create a family drama, for instance, then you better put a family in the book. If you're going to create something in a small town, you better really make that small town believable. Whatever it is that you really want to write and whatever corner of the market you want to create for yourself, you need to do that and do it well. And what other little tip? At the beginning of this video, I said there was like 30 million books out there. And that can be pretty daunting. That can make anybody want to quit before they even get started. Don't do that. Remember, I wrote 10 books in 8 years before I sold my first one. It was just as hard back then to get published as it is today, because back then there was no self-publishing. There was only the traditional publishers as an option to get your book out there. So I had a limited amount of opportunities for where I could send my book and what I could do with it. Yes, there are a lot of books. Yes, there are people putting out books every single day. And yes, there is a lot of competition. But if this is really your dream, then go after it. Don't give up. Don't quit. Don't let that competition stop you from writing that book. There are tons of videos on this channel that will teach you how to write a really strong book, because that's your best opportunity to get the readers to keep coming back. When you invest the time and energy into learning how to be the best possible author you can, you create a better reading experience, and that is what builds lifelong fans. Deliver an unforgettable reading experience for the reader, and they will keep coming back for everything you write. And then you can make 2025 the year your career took off. And if you want to see what I did wrong in all those books that were rejected, check out this video here, because I go into detail about everything that I was doing totally wrong and how I fixed it in order to sell my first book.